Okay, welcome everybody. As you join the webinar room, welcome to Navigating Now, episode 8. This is our weekly roundtable series. We will begin in just a moment or two. I want to welcome everybody joining the Zoom room. We also would like to welcome our guests that are joining us from LinkedIn. We broadcast each week live to LinkedIn. So thank you, LinkedIn community, for joining us. We're going to begin in just a moment. Okay, we will get started. Thank you so much, all of our communities, for joining episode 8 of the Navigating Now virtual roundtable series. We are here every Friday at 3 p.m. Central. And today we have a topic and a group of panelists that we are extremely excited about. But first, we will cover off on a few housekeeping items. For those of you who have joined us via Zoom, we would love your engagement. So please use the chat box to submit any questions that you might have for our panelists throughout the discussion. They could be targeted towards one of our panelists or the broader group. We will make sure we collect those throughout the hour, and we'll spend about 15 to 20 minutes towards the end answering your questions. We love your questions. They make the discussion a lot more robust and personal. So please, please, please use the chat box if you've got any inquiries or any thoughts. We love the engagement. For those of you who are joining us on LinkedIn, we also appreciate your engagement. You can drop questions or comments in the comment dialog box below the live stream. Thank you for joining, for all of you on LinkedIn. So before we dive in, I want to introduce our topic and our guests. Our topic today, of course, we are really focused on navigating, and we are focused on leadership showing up in new ways through our current marketplace, as well as kind of where we're headed post-pandemic. And today we're really focused on the new virtual first learning model. We have a couple of leaders from quite different ends of the business world who are going to share their perspective on how they have brought new learning experiences to either their employees or, in some cases, their customers. And so again, we really want to encourage folks to ask questions throughout for our leaders. So to introduce our leaders, first and foremost, we have Kerry Chitwood. She is the Director of Learning and Development at Sikich. They are a leading CPA tech services firm here in Chicago. Welcome, Kerry.
Thank you.
And next, we also have Brian Tufts. Brian is the Senior Director of U.S. Acute Renal. Baxter is a global healthcare company headquartered here in Chicago. Thanks for joining, Brian.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
All right. So without further ado, I'm also going to introduce our facilitator for the day, as always, Kathy Ock. She's a partner here at Thoughtium. Kathy, welcome, and I will turn the discussion over to you.
Thanks, Anthony. I'd like to start by welcoming our panelists and inviting each of them to just share a little bit about their role in the organization they represent, how you fit in as a leader, and maybe if you could also just share one piece of good news to get us started here today. Brian, we'd love to have you go first.
Sure. Introduction and good news. I can do that. The introduction part's easy for sure. So yeah, Brian Tufts. I'm the commercial lead for hemodialysis and acute dialysis at Baxter Healthcare, which means me and my team have responsibility for the devices that we sell, for the consumables that go along with it, and importantly for the therapy education of how to run renal replacement therapies and treat failing kidneys, both in a clinic setting and in a hospital setting. I've been with Baxter 12 years. Prior to that, I was a sales lead at a small startup company. So when I say dialysis and failing kidneys, that's something that's been in the forefront of the news the last 2 to 3 months with COVID-19. I think there was a lot of things we didn't know about the disease, but one thing that we learned recently was not only does it attack the lungs, it attacks the kidneys as well. So somewhere along the lines of 20 to 30% of patients that find themselves in the intensive care unit need some form of kidney support or renal replacement therapy. And Baxter, being the U.S. leader in that therapy, has been quite busy. So that's what's been keeping me busy and my team busy the last few months. You asked for good news. I guess I'll stay on that front for the piece of good news. The COVID-related demand for therapy, at least in the ICU, at least in intensive care therapies, is finally waning. And it took a little while to go down, right? I think we all heard like early April or mid-April, like we've hit the peak and it's going to go down now. It took a little while for the actual patients to progress, to be diagnosed, to be in the hospital, to be in the intensive care unit, to need the life-saving and supportive therapies. So there was a pretty long tail to that, but that's finally waning at this point, and going down. And we're seeing, obviously I see that on a day-to-day basis, like how many units from the day prior. So that's the piece of good news I'll share, at least from the most dangerous and most fragile of patients. We're finally seeing a decrease there.
That's great.
Wonderful. Such good news. Thank you so much. Okay, Kerry, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your role.
Sure. So I am the Director of Learning and Development at Sikich, which is a CPA and tech services firm, as Anthony shared with you. We are a mid-sized firm. We compete really against like all other mid-sized firms in the same industry. We don't compete against the big four. We're 1,000 and growing. We've grown mostly through acquisition. And I have been at the company 2 months, and I was in the office precisely one day before being sent home. And I give my company kudos because everything was fully functional day 2. My history prior to that was 19 years with McDonald's Corporation. So Fortune 500 to then I did some external consulting all in the area of talent management, leadership development. And then now at this mid-sized firm, so it's kind of somewhere in between. And it's been, an interesting adjustment for sure, just in the sense that if you think about CPA, a lot of paper with tax, needing to do inventory for audit and assurance, technology needing to be into people's systems, going on site with clients. So it's been a huge pivot, I would say, for the organization. But here that brings me to the good news, and that is our observation. I would say now my observation a couple months in is that people, Americans, I'm kind of thinking in the sense right now, are way more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. We have nothing to reference from the past with the pandemic, but I have found that this country does rally together. We pull together and we figure it out. And so people have been able to shift. And I think the other thing too is when we don't have like our normal pace that we used to have before, and the busyness and just being dispersed in all these different locations, there's been some silver linings. Obviously some things like with family time and just the forced slowdown, but I'm seeing more effort on people's part to connect. It's very easy sometimes if you're in the rat race to just stay in your lane, feeling isolated or feeling like we're all in this crazy storm together. I think people have been a little bit more proactive about reaching out, forming connections, and, pulling together. Yeah.
Wonderful to hear. Yes, we're going to get more into that, I think, as we step into the questions and some of the answers that I know you've had a chance to think about. Let's just build off of that for a moment. Thank you for sharing a little bit more about your own current context. We've all had so many challenges over the last 3 months specifically. So much has changed. You've both, even in your introductions, talk about how quickly upended our previous models were and how quickly we had to pivot and make adjustments. And I know you're each in very unique and special situations. So Kerry, maybe we'll start with you. In a professional services firm focused on CPA and technology, I know you've got a lot of things as moving parts in your world, and we'd love to just see from your perspective, what has been challenging for you and where have you found the opportunity to really move quickly into that virtual first environment?
Yeah, I think similar to the schools, and I think everybody has had, people with children have had varying responses or thoughts about how their school pivoted. In my case, our children's school pivoted in about a day and get everything remote. that was the same situation for our team. We have training, as you can imagine, again, from a compliance standpoint. A CPA needs to have a certain amount of CPE hours to keep their license in good standing. So we have training scheduled all the way out throughout the year. A lot of it, most of it, I would say, is face-to-face. And so on a dime, for the most part, we have had to move all of that to a virtual setting. And in some cases, like with some of those trainings, they have had things like inventory, where when in a face-to-face setting, you're actually like pulling documents, you're showing tax forms and so many different things. So it's pushed us to get pretty clever, I think, in how we do it. And the other thing too is just the level of collaboration. We had to think of some different modalities and ways to keep people engaged when they're in a virtual setting. And some
Yeah.
of the things that, yeah, I think some of the things that we're seeing that have been helpful is keeping things kind of shifting their attention. So we've used things like polls or chat. We take them off mute. We're really pushing them to engage like they would in a face-to-face setting. And you don't want to get like overly bells and whistles-ish, with gaming and pulling them all over the place, but certainly more of that, because the temptation to multitask on their computer. So we were, really requiring video unless there's some extenuating circumstance to keep them engaged and see body language. And then really just having to build a whole new curriculum. Now on the soft skills, some of those things that are richer, nice face-to-face conversations around emotional intelligence, having to build a solely virtual workshop to do those things. When you would have worked intimately in pairs, it's like finding ways to break them out. They can have those pair discussions in that virtual training platform. So and you have to be scrappy about it. So if there's something we don't know, we are going to every resource we can find to make sure we understand how to use the technology, that we're staying, current on some of those things. So
wonderful. Wow, so many different dimensions of the learning experience that you've just identified, and we've had to figure it all out at one time. I think to your point, it's so interesting that the whole set of factors had to be really reconsidered at once, and it all has to be brought back together, as you're saying, and offered up, almost concurrently. So wonderful example. I'd love to have you step in, and I know you've extended it even further because you're doing this with customers, and the urgency has been so significant, as you talked about, given the importance of kidney treatment in the context of the COVID-19 experience. So maybe you can tell us what you've been able to do in the virtual first world and how you've been able to offer that up to your patients and your customers.
Yeah, it's been a big change for us. I mean, I got to be honest with you. We did some amount of kind of virtual training and remote training previously, but for the most part, our therapy educators and clinical educators were doing that in person in the hospital with nurses and physicians in the hospital setting. And we would go there, we would travel there, we would do that face to face. And answer questions and train on the devices and therapy directly hands-on in the hospital. Sometimes in hospital learning environments and in conference rooms inside the hospital, and sometimes in the floor of the intensive care unit, right? But it was almost always done, vast majority done live, in person, face to face. And for the last 2 months, it's been none of that. It's been 100% virtual. You say virtual first, it's virtual only for us right now. Right. And I mentioned off the top, the hospitals didn't want us there, right? So the hospital rules and regulations, they closed to all visitors, right? Sometimes family members weren't even able to come in and see their family members that were there. So the last thing they wanted was a vendor to come in and be teaching them and training them, right? To say nothing of the fact that it was our corporate policy to be grounded for a time. So, right, for all those reasons, it was virtual only, which was an entire set of hurdles that we had to jump through and jump over and tackle, which was really interesting. One of which, as I mentioned earlier, is that the demand was through the roof, right? So there was big need for it. I mean, part of that was caused by COVID, and then there was COVID considerations and patients that were clotting and behaving as we hadn't seen before. Part of that was just the demand for the therapy being higher, and then a whole lot of folks were buying new devices and new equipment, and new nurses had to be trained on that. So it was a tough situation where we had a huge demand and we had to do everything virtually. And we went to our clinical educators that were typically, you know, flying all over the nation to do these trainings. And we said, which one of you can set up virtual studios in your home? Because we talked about putting them in locations. You know, this all played out very quickly over a couple of days as the nation kind of shut down. And we thought, well, maybe if we have a few sites, maybe we can rent an office location in a major metropolitan area. But it very quickly became, none of this is going to work. We're going to have to do this out of their home. So we were a bit bold. We were a bit fast acting and you know, went online one night and just bought a ton of equipment. We bought lighting, audio, high-end cameras, streaming equipment, and we had 5 different Baxter employees, but former nurses, turn their homes into virtual studios. And we shipped these are big, large medical devices, shipped them to their homes, and they started doing virtual education out of their living rooms 3 days later. So it was a heck of a journey. And I would say that the hospitals were appreciative of it. I mean, obviously it wasn't a full professional studio, right? We did our best to send backdrops and make it look a bit better. But what was really important was the content. And the content didn't change, right? So all the training we were doing before, the curriculum, to use that learning word, was the same. It was just how do you make it all virtual? And that was difficult to do because a lot of it is, you know, hands-on, touching the device, seeing how things react. So credit to our nurses who worked through that. We started training each other. We did 2 or 3 days of internal training to make sure that we could kind of make the training virtual, and then went live quickly thereafter in kind of a virtual only manner. But it's well received, and the hospitals really appreciated it. They appreciated everything that we were doing, and that we were able to pivot there. But I would agree with what Kerry said. It's a challenge. I wouldn't underscore the challenge of saying, well, it's the same curriculum, it's the same course. Just do the same course you would have done in a 2-hour session. Just do it virtually in front of the camera. What's the difference? It's a big difference. It really is. And to keep people engaged and to keep them focused and to give that kind of real world, I'm going to use the word tactile in case of touching the machine and getting that kind of real time feedback. You lose a bit of that, right? So that was a challenge that we had to work through. And for the most part, I would say we're there. And I'm assuming our conversation will now go to kind of what's next and what does the new normal look like. But it's interesting. It's interesting to see what we've been able to accomplish virtually and what some hurdles we say, man, it can't wait till we can get back to in person to tackle those challenges.
I think it's interesting too, just this, you know, to your point, just to really, so being engaged is one thing, but to really make sure that they have understanding, because the stakes obviously in your setting, Brian, are like life threatening. In our case, you know, not understanding something related to a tax change, and the financial impact to an organization, brand embarrassment for our clients if something's done improperly. So being able to really make sure that they are truly learning it. We've had to start inserting like more quizzes, having them do teach backs, things like that, to like, let's make sure you're really learning it.
Right. That was actually going to be my question. I just was, in listening to what you both said, I would imagine that checking for understanding when the person isn't nearby and you can't read the verbal and the nonverbal signals, that is a more difficult thing to do in a virtual environment. So that was the exact question I was going to ask. How do you ensure that the people you're trying to train or instruct, that they really understand what you're saying? And maybe, Kerry, as you're pointing out, there are assessments that you could do. There are in-the-moment questions you can ask to ensure that somebody has really fully absorbed or understood the point you've been trying to make. Any other things that you feel have been dramatically different from the live experience that have helped you in the virtual scenario?
I think that's, so teach backs, I think when all of a sudden you put it on a participant, that you need to understand this concept well enough to now take a current situation that you've been in, or even a past situation that you've been in, and now teach us back in the room, in the safety of the room, where you have the facilitator able to, you know, give them some guidance, and, you know, you're pretty much on track, or asking the room, where did you hear maybe a mistake in that? Or, so again, this is especially important, like around knowledge content, you know, in some cases where it's a soft skill, that's hard to do anyway. It's like you're really getting them to gain more self-awareness. With those things, we do find that, again, just really that applied practice, and then doing like boosters in between So we're playing around with things like podcasts, like little short animated videos, and then just really open community forums in between workshops to say, you know, it's been 3 weeks out since the workshop. We're going to just do this kind of open discussion and come in and start talking to us about when you've tried to apply something, how's it going, so that it's not the dilution of the knowledge until the next time you come back together, you know, maybe 6 weeks later. And there's that accountability there. I can't just scribble in my participant workbook, yeah, I'm going to go apply this, but we have them come back and like, we're there to coach and support. It's not, you know, punitive by any means. So.
Yeah, great point. Wonderful.
Yeah, Kerry, I mean, I think you touched on a couple key things there. You mentioned earlier the importance of video, and we're really pushing two-way video. Even if it's a group of nurses in a hospital conference room, we want to see you. We want those nonverbal clues. We don't want to be just streaming video into a black hole, so to speak, right? We want to be able to see the feedback and see how that's landing on the other side. And to the point of teachbacks, when we're teaching on a device, obviously we have the device in front of us, but we also have the device in the hospital. So that's, okay, you go set it up now. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to sit silently on the video. You show me. Do a set load, do a full, kind of patient onboard in the conference room, right, in the safety of the conference room. Set it up. Let's see how it goes. And Kerry, I think you hit the nail on the head with kind of I'm going to use the word multi-channel as well. We have created a library of videos that we now make available for free to all the users as well. That we say, hey, go here, and if today went pretty fast, or if you're not comfortable coming out of today, here's this library of videos you can review over the coming days, and then we're going to come back and do a check-in thereafter. So if people are either just tired that day, or they're not picking it up fast enough, or they need to see it again, or went a little bit too fast on one little detail, they have something to go back and lean on that's very consistent with the training that they just received kind of live a day or two ago, that they can go back and play over and over again to catch up and see that. So I think all of those factors together lead to a good learning environment.
I think that's actually especially interesting just because I have literally heard of, even in some of the medical industries, like going on like Google or YouTube, trying to find stuff. So this way you're really ensuring by making that available to them that they're going to a source of truth, and you can ensure accuracy. Same for us. We want to make sure you're following like our audit guidelines, and you're not trying to go out to like different disparate sites. If you're in the middle of a tax return for a big client, that they're not trying to like wing it, and that it's like a knowledge database where they can go and grab it, you know, when they need it.
Yeah, I think oh, go ahead, Brian.
Oh, sorry, and I couldn't help myself. The marketing side of me, right? Because I'm a data junkie and everything else, right? So the marketing side of it, right? We have this up on our website, and we directed folks to them and said, here's where the videos are, here's what you need. So we can see which ones they're going after. We can see which videos are most popular. We know which training they're going back to most often. We see how many hits, and it's been amazing. The number of hits we've had to the training website, the number of video downloads we've seen, and views and repeated views and time on page and everything else like that is just amazing. So we know it's being used. We know which elements are most popular, and that does nothing but better inform us moving forward in terms of how we could continue to meet those needs.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I think one of the most interesting things about the shift that we're going through is a lot of this technology has existed for years, and we're actually being challenged and at times forced to essentially upskill to the technology. So it's not like this new technology platform has just shown up like, AI or VR, could potentially in the future. This is us as a society and as business professionals having to upskill ourselves to platforms that have been there. And it's really interesting to see organizations, and I'm hearing it from both of you today, go through this process of, how do we quickly convert live experiences to virtual? And then you almost enter this phase of how do we make it more meaningful for our customers? And this might be a good segue to the next topic, which is, so what's next? Is it more of a blended approach that allows more optionality and allows a little bit more choice, even when we're not in a shelter-in-place environment? It's great to see that progression happening.
Yeah.
So just a view on this, I think I had a really kind of an aha moment so the woman that I report to, she is a partner in the firm. She has 2 sons that are both special needs, and she was traveling. She was staying in the office late for, this has been going on for years. And she and I were having a one-on-one, and she was really genuinely asking me, like, how am I doing? And I shared, and she said, what are your thoughts on going back to the office? And I said, I really can operate either way. And she surprised me by saying, I can see clearly now, and I will never go back to the pace that I was at before. She's like, we've seen it, like, we can do this. And yeah, do we crave some face-to-face, and we still need that at some point? Yeah, it may be a hybrid, but I don't think many people may even want to go back to that pace when a lot of people have really found that they can still be productive. For me personally, like, I've been dogged by working mother's guilt for 18 years. It's gone. Like, my kids can come in and say hi and ask what they get from DoorDash any second. But so long story short is, I think there's the old normal, there's the current, and we're feeling our way out. I don't think it's ever going to look like what it was. And I don't know that it's going to stay just the way it is either. I think we're going to evolve into something. And I think there's also a lot of power and freedom of choice of how you absorb content, how you do your work, when you do your work, the resources you use, and giving people, how it is today with going into Netflix and being able to pick, everything's on demand. I can pick whatever I want, when I want. I can watch an hour or 3 hours. There's so much choice in what we do and how we spend our time. Now our work lives are starting to mirror that. And I think as like learning professionals, we need to not just meet them where they are, but like meet them where they're, like, enable where they're going and be able to kind of anticipate and give them that choice again and how they consume content.
Yeah, it's so true. Everything's become so personalized.
Yes.
And this is like an even bigger push in that direction. If you think about it, it's become so much more tailored to the individual needs. And now we can get it in so many different forms. Brian mentioned multi-channel before. I think it's just so indicative of where the world is shifting to. Thank you, Kerry. Brian, would you like to come in and talk about what you think is next, given the radical changes you have made in your own learning model over the last 3 to 4 months?
Yeah, I mean, and it's unclear, right? I think it's unclear at this time exactly where we're going to land.
Yeah.
I think that it would be a failing on us as kind of an industry if, and I don't know when, but call it a year from now or 2 years from now, if we just go back, right? Go back to the way things were. If we don't treat this as the compelling event that it is to drive some amount of meaningful change, then I think we've lost a precious opportunity, right? Because this is such a change, right? This is pressure testing so many different learning and education opportunities, right? What can truly be done? So I think we're finding some elements that are very difficult to do in a virtual way that are going to lend themselves to probably come back in a face-to-face and direct way.
Sure.
But that's what I'm really curious at. Not to put everything in a ledger, but my accounting colleague will like it that way, right? So I mean, if we're drawing a line down the center of the page and going left and right, there's something that we probably never thought could have been done in a virtual first environment that we've learned in the last 60, 90 days. Yeah, they actually can be, right? And there's other things that maybe we would have been hesitant on, or maybe we would have thought this is going to be really hard. And it turns out we were right. It is really hard. We've done it for the last month or two because we had to, but the ideal scenario is to get back to kind of the way things were. So I'm envisioning on a go-forward basis a little bit of a hybrid approach of the two, but we can't go kind of back to the way it was. I think that's a missed opportunity. This is, look, if you look at for silver linings from this very terrible situation, it's forced us to think differently and act differently. And let's use that as learning professionals. Let's use that as our own learning opportunity to get better and really find ways that we can make things stick that we're learning in the last couple months.
Yeah, love that. Anthony, do you want to jump in?
No, please.
Okay. I think that's such an important point. We sometimes move too quickly back to what it was. And as Kerry said before, it's not like we had really healthy and sustainable patterns in some aspects of our lives before COVID-19. I work with lots of clients who are working ridiculous hours, 24/7, never able to unplug. So I think the opportunity that this has created really does test us all to think about what are the real benefits or the advantages that we've experienced that we can pull from this and carry forward? And how do we get to some kind of a blended model or an approach that brings the best of what we had previously together with the best of what we've experienced, as you said, Brian, because we've had to.
Mm-hmm.
How do we find that path? And I think that does create a lot of uncertainty and confusion, because those rules are even less clear than some of what we had to go through in the last 90 days. The next 90 days are much more of, we'll have to figure it out, right? We'll have to decide how best to navigate the next phase of this, because it's not just going to go back to what it was. So what are you finding in that space that is personally most challenging for you, and how have you been able to work through that? I'm just curious. We've all had so many ups and downs, and we've been in struggle in certain ways, and I'm just wondering what has really stood out for you, and how have you been able to work beyond that or past it? Brian, maybe you want to just weigh in on this one.
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of how do we go back and how do we start expanding training and think about the blended approach on a go forward basis? I mean, I'll share personally. We just had our first hospital ask for in-person training again, and they said, "Hey, yeah, we're coming up to speed. We really want in-person training again." And our first question was, "Are you sure? Are you going to let us in the door if you show up? Like, you know, are you really sure? Because we have to fly to get there. So don't tell me I have to stay in, you know, quarantine for 14 days after I take my flight, because that's not going to work, right? Are you really sure?" So that's becoming all too real just this week. Of now, how do we kind of open back up in times of COVID and think about re-engaging that we want to engage in you know, physical training, right? And now that our customers are asking us to come back and do that, it's an interesting blend. And then how do you prioritize? How do you make that call of like, okay, well, yeah, this one's worth it. Okay, this is a hospital that's a whole new system and they don't have any super users, and absolutely we need to get in there. Versus another system, well, yeah, we could probably do all of that virtually. They have a number of different super users. We could do refresher classes online, and that's going to be sufficient. So making those decisions and obviously working with our partners on those decisions as to what they're comfortable with, and then what our educators are comfortable with, and how we stitch all that together is going to be I mean, sorry, Kathy, I don't have an easy answer for you. It's going to be something that we're going to have to work out. We're going to have to work closely together on, because it's not clear, at least not clear to me right now, how that's going to get stitched back together. So we're still in a virtual first, but it's going to be interesting as we, and I guess we're still in a virtual only, as we transition from virtual only to virtual first to blended, over the next, you know, call it 1 month, 3 months, 6 months. That's going to be a very interesting and textured journey. Yeah.
I think, though, to your point, Brian, you had to figure it out when there really wasn't an option. Now there are options, but, you know, as you said, we'll keep figuring it out. Right now, you've got more of the channels and more of the tools to work with people to define what the solution looks like for the next phase. And it may be different, to your point. It may be very different for different customers or different decision makers that you're working with.
Yep.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. Kerry, what would you like to come in with?
Yeah, you know, so I guess a couple of perspectives. For one, like our organization, because we have clients everywhere and we have offices in like every kind of wing of the nation, we were starting to like just trying to find lowest common denominators. So it's like, okay, what are the different states' rules? Then what's going to be happening with the schools? Because if we have half of our employees use the office on a rotation and then keep swapping them out, well, what happens with the schools are doing the same thing and half of those kids are in the school and they're on a rotation. Now they have childcare issues. So we have finally really just taken this approach of we're not even going to look at this again until at least September 1st. All trainings, everything, we already know it's going to be virtual. Like we're kind of just taking the pressure off of ourselves. Now, on case-by-case situations, if someone needs to access the office or we need to go to a client site to pull, you know, files and do audits, we're taking precautions, and those are all really being led, you know, by leadership of the organization. So that's just from like a business perspective, and it's also like from a core value standpoint of our organization is it's always been very much safety first, and it's very much about a passion for the people. one other thing I did want to say though, just about uncertainty that I've been noticing, that was the first thing they asked, like, hey, Kerry, can you just like whip up a leading through uncertainty course and like put on like 3 webinars, and not wanting to jump on. I mean, I really did a lot of research, but one thing that just keeps surfacing is genuinely this important of kind of having more vulnerable discussions with people, allowing them to, because we're experiencing, I mean, there's real big spikes in like depression and anxiety. And
Yeah.
you add this highly introverted, talking to a CPA about self-care is always kind of funny. They're like, I've been working 70-hour weeks during tax season since I was, 24 years old. So like, don't tell me about self-care, but they're listening. Like that right now is a really big focus, and we're peppering in things around like self-care and taking time away, just to kind of keep our employees like steady and even in a place where they can deliver good work and they can learn. But it's a little bit of a culture shift for the organization because, that's not something that they typically talk about, and it's not typically the way that they work. So it's been interesting.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of that show up. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I have some questions coming in from our different communities. Before we move into that phase, I'd love to just find out if there is a piece of advice that you'd like to offer up to our listeners today, something that has been helpful to you or that you have been able to offer to others that you think would be beneficial for our listeners today. Kerry, maybe you'd like to start us off.
Sure. Yep. So something just really practical is I have found a lot of people that really just need to be actually swing to the other side and get really organized and optimize your space. So we, even just how you track initiatives and the work that we're doing, making sure we're leveraging like whether it's Google Sheets or Smart Sheets or whatever it is, that your team has transparency since you can't see each other. Even your office space. So a lot of people are really wanting this distinction of I work in this place, and when I close the door, this is my home now, and this is my personal space. And then it may not be the answer. It's more just this trigger to really slow down to speed up and figure out if we're going to be doing this for the next few months, what do I really need to do to take care of myself and optimize my productivity? And then the other thing is, I think just, again, it's just the self-care, making sure that we are giving ourselves time to feel joy, to exercise, binge a show, whatever it is that kind of recharges you, makes you feel good, to kind of counterbalance some of the isolation and some of the other stuff that's happening.
Yeah, wonderful. We had a panelist on a previous session that talked about the fact that she had taken a mental health day, and she was very clear in calling it that with her team, and she gave everybody permission to have that same opportunity. I think that's such a wonderful example of just how much we can bring the self-care forward and use it as a way to engage in different conversations with each other.
Yeah.
So thank you. Brian, how about you? A piece of advice that you'd like to offer our listeners?
Yeah, I like Kerry's advice. I think to stay organized and stay focused and be clear with teams and roles and responsibilities. That's really important because, at least I feel that. Let me say that hits home, Kerry, because with all the craziness that's been the last few months with our team, if you don't have that, then it's just everything kind of falls apart. So I think that's really important. Yeah, I mean, where I was going to go, I guess I mentioned it earlier in terms of having a little bit of courage and kind of being bold. We ran out. We didn't really know how this was going to work when we made the change and bought all this equipment and shipped it all to their home and asked these nurses, like, put it together, like put up a backdrop, put the device, set up this camera, put it on a tripod. Like, we literally bought everything and had it shipped to them in a giant box that showed up on the front door. And the next day the device showed up on the front door and they had to put it all together, right? So I guess, take action, be bold, and it's kind of an old tired phrase maybe, but, don't let perfect get in the way of good. At least for us, like we had to continue to support these hospitals. And is it ideal to be in someone's living room? I don't know. I mean, maybe it's not the best, but the fact is we have the right people. We have great nurses. We have great educators. Everyone's trying hard. The people on the side of the hospital are trying hard. They really do want to learn it. So everyone is working their best. And I was shocked at the end of some of these sessions. They were thanking us. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. It's really cool that you turned your home into this. It's awesome what you've done. And like, no one was judging like, well, that's kind of a homebrew. That's kind of an interesting backdrop you have over there, right? No one was judging. Everyone was super appreciative of the work and breakthrough. So don't get caught up in imperfection. Just run with it. Be bold, go with it. And I think you'll be surprised how well things work out in general. And everyone's dealing with this right now. Everyone's dealing with the ambiguity in the new virtual first environment. So people run with it for you.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, I know we've had some questions come in through the chat box. So Anthony, I'm going to pass the baton over to you and see what additional thoughts you have for our panelists or questions.
All right, thank you. All right, and also thank you, Kerry and Brian, for your insights thus far. The conversation's been great. We're actually getting a few comments about, we've got first-time viewers, first-time listeners, appreciate the practical tips, especially checking for application and feedback. So thank you for that. We do have a question that came in via the chat box. And this is directed at Brian, but it could go either way, and you both might have something to contribute. As the increased adoption of digital learning tools, telehealth, and app-based ecosystems make virtual learning more accessible at Baxter or any organization, how is the organization planning to upskill employees that may be less comfortable with virtual learning? And that could be a question for you.
Yeah,
I know, Brian, you've had some experience.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good one. So, and we could take that in a whole number of different directions. And the telehealth question is a good one. And that's an emerging trend. I mean, that was an emerging trend before COVID, right? So that's had, to be fair, that's also had an inflection point in the last 2 to 3 months, and that's really taken off. But that would have been an emerging trend, over the last couple of years anyway. I think it's a great question of getting people comfortable, and I would say that the last few months have, necessitated that, and people have had to get comfortable. Folks that don't like to see themselves on video, or I don't like to do WebExes, or whatever else. Folks have kind of had to adapt by necessity, right? And sometimes that could be the best driver is necessity, right? To force it pretty quickly. So I think that I'm going to refer back to something Kerry said earlier in terms of continuing to nurture that and be respectful of that, and acknowledge that, hey, we're asking you to do a big change. I mean, in our case, some of the clinical educators we work with have been critical care nurses for 20 years, and then they've left and joined us in industry, and they've been doing this for 6 years, right? This is their whole career. They're experts in technology and app-based learning and that type of thing, right? So that's it's a change, but to just be respectful of that and recognize that, and then work with those individuals through it, we'll get there. I mean, it's the same core content. It's the same core curriculum. I see it more as a tool question than a capabilities question, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm not questioning the capabilities of anyone. They'll get there. Just help them out with the tools and make sure that they're set up for success in the new tools that they'll be leveraging. But the core curriculum and learning principles and everything else we're working on are still the same. So, Kerry, I'm hoping that's aligned to where you're headed, but that's kind of how.
Yeah, I was just going to tag on real quick. And so one thing that we've done is in the webinars, we've been saying, even if it's a one-on-one meeting, we're really encouraging you to use video, because we promise you after 2 or 3 times, it's like the new normal. It's old hat. Then the other thing, I've been doing so many meetings with stakeholders doing like a needs analysis. So I've had to meet all these people for the first time. What I do is whenever I join, I always join with camera. And then they feel kind of like, well, I'm going to follow suit. And sometimes they'll say like, oh, I don't always do camera. And I say, you don't have to. I said, but you know what? We're all in the same boat. So I always kind of like encourage and trying to like get them used to it. But I give them the option. I would never, enforce that. But I think they've all been saying, well, we've been doing a little bit more camera, and they're all kind of saying the same things. After I have like 2 or 3 meetings with video, they don't even think twice about it. Everyone stopped doing full makeup like you would do in the office. We're all enjoying the extra hour of sleep by not having to do all of that. Life right now is just very raw. My kitten's been on calls, like people's kids are walking in and out. Nobody judges. that is just really, really changing.
And I think
Yeah.
embracing some of the raw nature of the way that we communicate today
This
is
is
something that
life.
we've all learned over time. And it's been really interesting to see a little bit of the filter come off as we've all gotten to know our new world and the new environment. We have a question that maybe builds off of that a little bit. And this is geared towards Kerry, but again, it can go either way. We've been talking a lot about learning delivery. Do you see anything changing permanently in the behaviors of our learners? So those folks who are receiving this new training and new modalities, do we, and I think I'm reading the question correctly, but do we foresee their behaviors changing for the good or permanently as we start to maybe come back to the office?
I think that people's learning behaviors, if they're just not really interested, that may be the case whether they're in person or on a camera. People who are engaged and kind of interested in learning, it's just like performance problems. People who think that their employee who's working, if they're at home, they're not working unless they can see them. If you're going to slack, you're going to slack in the office or you're going to slack at home.
Yeah.
And if you're going to kill it at work, you're going to do those same behaviors. So I don't know that the learning behavior necessarily will change based on how that individual is wired, but there are some things that I think are really relevant, which is the days of keeping people in a room for 2 days, especially around leadership training. There is so much dilution. They're getting pinged by clients. They probably have to work that night to make up for the day they just spent. So our approach at Sikich is going to be it is a consistent drip feed in shorter digestible chunks frequently and ongoing. It's not an isolated training event. In fact, I've abolished the word training when it comes to soft skills because you don't get trained, you evolve and you grow. And it also honors the operating reality of our workers they need to be billable, they need to be utilized. So it's disruptive to the client to take them away for 2 days. So I see this development journey and being online for 2 hours is even worse because you're usually tethered with a headset. So it's like, we're just trying to find ways to make this as like palatable to start with. And then once we have them in there in that short session, get them engaged, have fun with them, have some kind of aha moment.
Yeah. Brian, maybe I'll ask the same question for you in terms of let's call it the customer experience. Do you see the customer experience bending or shaping as we kind of come back to the hospital in your case?
Yeah, I mean, so part of it is structured, right? And for those that are on the medical clinical side, but familiar with continuing medical education credits, and nurses have to be certified, and like there's a certain number of hours that have to be taken, and that type of thing. So there is a little bit of structure that I don't expect is going to get blown up anytime soon, right? So that's still going to be a thing, and it's still is it a 3-hour course or is it a 4-hour course? Is it certified for education, continuing education credits, that type of thing? So there'll still be that element to it. But I tell you what, there is more and more continuing education credits that are being done virtually. There's more and more ways for nurses to continue their certifications and do so kind of at their own pace, at their own hours. To Kerry's point, it's not like, oh, you have to, find someone to cover your shift and take a full day off and smash 9 hours of CE together in one day because you had coverage that day, right? So I think that the idea of, if you want to call it kind of the Netflix on demand world that we're living in these days, of getting the right training at the right time when I want it in bite-sized pieces, I think is going to be a new reality. That will be overlaid against the context of certifications and everything else that's still very much the reality in the medical field. But we're looking to adapt to that, quite honestly. We're making sure that we're aligned to that and that we're parsing out information and learning opportunities that are consistent with that.
And I think to your point, Brian, in your case, like a learner fatigue and not being able to understand something, you have to look at the downstream impacts of what happens to a patient. And so it's like really kind of seeing how does this suit the learner, but how does this impact the business, like the safety of the business. So it's kind of that bigger macro picture too.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. And this actually comes from LinkedIn. how are you, or has your communication with your teams changed at all? Are there any best practices in the way that you're communicating with your teams as leaders in your organization? It could be for either one.
Yeah, I mean, I could start. I'm gonna follow on with what Kerry said earlier with the video thing. I think in the first couple of days of this, there was hesitancy, and everyone was kind of texting and going over the phone and that type of thing. We have Microsoft Teams. I'm sure a lot of folks that are viewing have that as well, as a collaboration tool. And more Teams meetings started popping up, right? And little flashes in the corner of your computer. Anthony is calling you, right? And the video pops up, and you can see each other right away. I agree with Kerry that once people got used to using that, they adapted it pretty quickly. And the video has been a decent substitute, right? It's not perfect, but really leveraging the tools and jumping on a WebEx where 4 or 5 people can see each other and one person is driving. And yeah, you're not at the whiteboard in a conference room, but if someone is driving and creating content in PowerPoint where you're all reviewing and editing and you can see each other and see the nonverbal cues and everything else there, it's been pretty amazing. I think how comfortable folks have got, how quickly with that is kind of the new normal. So I think that's been refreshing, and I think that's going to be here to stay. I don't see that going away. I think there's going to be a lot of remote working, virtual learning. I'm curious, not to jump too far afield, Anthony. I'm curious as to how this is just going to change work. I mean, we're talking about learning and education and stuff right now. I'm curious as to whether, Baxter is a Fortune 500 company based in the Chicagoland area. How do we think about teams? How do you think about hiring just remote employees and building entirely virtual teams and remote groups? What does that look like on a go-forward basis? And thinking about versus co-locating it in a specific city and drawing from a talent pool that's either, the New Jersey pharma talent pool or the San Diego MedTech pharma pool or the Chicago innovation pool or whatever you want to kind of label those as different areas versus just a new virtual working environment.
Well, we're starting to see the first movers to more of a permanent virtual structure. Twitter, Salesforce.com, both two major companies that have announced that their folks don't need to come back to the office indefinitely. And so you've got to think that we're all going to be thinking about how does that affect the way that we design our organizations. That's a great point, Brian. Sorry, Kerry, I cut you off a little bit.
Oh, no, I mean, I was just like, what a brilliant point from a talent pool perspective. When you've been isolated to like your local 60-mile radius for talent and now the doors get blown open, just like the competitiveness and what you have access to, I think is just amazing. I think the only other practical tip on the original question, we've done like all video, like my team one-on-ones, our team meetings are all video. But what I've tried to do is like all the people, like all my stakeholders, people that I'm working with closely, I do generally try to chameleon to their style. So if they usually engage me with instant message or they prefer the more formalized email, then I will reach out to them in those ways. So my boss, she still loves email. It's like her favorite thing. So I always just email her. But some of my like outgoing and chatty team that reports me, I'm really careful to send them like an instant message like, hey, good morning. So just trying to accommate their style and be really flexible myself.
It's so interesting. It's almost like we're going to see email become the new snail mail through all of this, right? Because it's like, if I need to get a hold of Kathy, a year ago, email would have been maybe the most direct, but now, I mean, I go immediately to text. Or I go to Slack or one of these other channels that like is flashing in her face. And I just remember a world where, just 10, 15 years ago, like you would intentionally and intently check your email all day, every day. And you would almost go through every single one. And so I think the speed at which we're consuming information and of course, now in today's world, it's going to speed that up even more. So it'll be really interesting to see how this affects the future of work. With that, I want to pause and just thank both of you, Kerry and Brian, for jumping into the discussion. Your insights today were extremely valuable and I thought very authentic as well too. You both coming from different sides of the business world. It's so great to bring different leaders to the table and see how much overlap there really is between what you're both focused on and some of the challenges and opportunities that you're both facing. So thank you for your insights. Thank you for your authenticity today. And thank you so much for joining us, Brian.
Thank you so much for including us, including
Absolutely.
me. I appreciate it. I learned a lot from Brian and from you guys as well, and from the questions that the group asked.
Yes.
Thank you.
Wonderful. I also want to
pleasure.
thank you, Brian. I want to thank our community for joining us as well, too, those who joined formally in the webinar room, as well as our LinkedIn and YouTube community. As you all know, we broadcast live every Thursday at 3:00 p.m. And we would like to announce we have a new June series coming up. So the theme for each Thursday in June is going to be building resilience. And we have a handful of leaders that have already enrolled to join the discussion. Those who have either spoken on resilience before at the Roundtable. So Tim Jones is a great previous guest of ours. He's a fan favorite. And we've got a few others that are going to join the discussion on building resilience as leaders. So we really encourage everybody to join us every Thursday at 3:00. You can join and sign up for free at thoughtium.com/live. And of course, Facebook and LinkedIn as well. So thank you so much. I also want to mention, we've had a lot of comments about this, the cohort that we're building here of leaders coming together and sharing their experiences. And we have designed a very unique coaching experience for leaders from any industry, mid-level leaders that would like to get together, have some development opportunity, and also share some of their experiences and their challenges and opportunities. We're calling this the Leadership Accelerator, and we're kicking our first cohort off here on June 17th. You can get more information on this experience at thoughtium.com/accelerator, and we would love to have you join these cohorts and extend the discussion on topics like these. So for all of you interested, thoughtium.com/accelerator. So again, thank you to our community. Brian, Kerry, thank you so much for joining us. And we wish you all a wonderful afternoon. We'll see you next Thursday.
Thanks.
Thank you.